and collaborator, recently participated in the pro-life rally in April in Washington, D.C. He was at one point with a group of Catholics, and he suggested that they recite the Rosary in reparation for the crime of abortion. Everyone agreed except for one person. The one person was clad in Bermuda shorts, and he felt that the Rosary was not ecumenical enough. He was a new priest. I'm Julius Smetona. This is what Catholics believe. Some years ago, there appeared in Newsweek a study by psychologist Richard Sipe, who himself was a former priest. The study was a fruit of over 1,500 interviews. One of the conclusions was that 20% of American priests are deviates. Another 20% are engaged in womanizing. As shocking as these figures are, there is an even more disconcerting reality. It is highly probable that any priest ordained after 1968 using the new formula of ordination is probably not even a priest at all. With me to discuss the new priests are three priests who are old priests, in the true sense of the word, and who celebrate the traditional Latin Mass exclusively. They reject the Second Vatican Council and the new religion which it generated. Father Donald Sanborn is pastor of St. Pius X Church in Warren, Michigan. Father Clarence Kelly is spiritual director of St. Joseph's Novitiate, a congregation of traditional Catholic sisters in Round Top, New York. And Father Thomas Marachka is pastor of St. Anne Church in White Bear Lake, Minnesota, a suburb of Minneapolis-St. Paul. What is the problem with the new rite of priestly ordination?
They left out one very important word. Pius XII defined very clearly what was necessary for validity of ordination. Up to that time, it was highly disputed what in the ceremony pertained to validity. He settled the whole question in 1948 and set down the formula. And in the new Latin formula of 1968, which Paul VI put out, it looked exactly the same as what Pius XII said it should be, but they left out one word, and that was ut, which means in Latin, in order that, which shows a relationship of cause between what goes before and what goes afterwards. And the cause here is the reception of grace, and the effect is that you become a priest. The causal relationship between those two things was for some reason taken out. And so you have a formula that is being used now for making priests, which is not the approved formula set down by his apostolic authority, by Pope Pius XII. And it has an essential defect, because the Church teaches that if you alter the matter or the form of a sacrament, the form is the words, if you alter it in a substantial manner, you do not confect the sacrament. That's the problem. So,
say, for example, in baptism, every sacrament has matter and form. If I were to take a newborn child and perform a baptism and say the traditional words in Latin, let's say if I got the water and I said, in the name of the Father and of the Son and of Buddha, instead of the Holy Trinity, that would be clearly an invalid baptism, because I did not say the correct words in the administering of the sacrament. Or if I decided to use, instead of using water, let us say I decided to use beer or some other liquid that was clearly, in the ordinary estimation of man, not natural water, you would have an invalid sacrament. Or if I used a doubtful liquid, something dirty water, it would be doubtful. So what Father is saying that at least in the form, the words that are used in the ordination in the new priesthood, or at least we can say doubtful. And the problem worsens when it is translated into English. And most of the priests ordained since the Second Vatican Council are ordained in the vernacular language. And when that Latin is translated into the English language, it even becomes more obscure. And the probability is that these priests may not be priests at all.
It raises a question about the possibility that it is invalid. And because there is a possibility that it is invalid, then the sacraments administered by those men, I'm not judging their consciousness of this, how much they realize what they are doing, nor am I excusing them, but objectively speaking, the sacraments that they administer are therefore doubtful sacraments and sacrilegious, because to administer a sacrament doubtfully would be a sacrilege. It's a very serious problem, because someone might be dying and they call a priest to absolve them on their deathbed, and it is conceivable that the absolution given by these Novus Ordo priests, ordained since 1968, I believe, it's possible that that absolution has no more power than if the absolution were to be administered by their husband or wife or son or daughter.
Someone might object, well, Paul VI changed it. And I would respond to that by saying, how can we trust these post-conciliar popes with the sacraments when they have destroyed the Catholic Church? How can we say, well, we'll just accept anything they say or do, when if we do accept it, we become Protestants and we lose the faith? That's the
also
problem.
the character of the document issued by Pope Pius XII is a very solemn character, Sacramentum Ordinis. He says, I believe, we define and declare by our apostolic authority that these are the words for the consecration of a bishop, the ordination of a priest, and the ordination of a deacon. It's not as if he simply issued a directive saying that, well, we're going to do it this way. Very, very solemn document, very specific, very clear, giving the exact words. And that is why it raises a very serious question, because if the dropping of that one word in the Latin text introduces a change of meaning, then it invalidates. Because in the form of a sacrament, the words of a sacrament, whenever the change that is introduces a change of meaning, it invalidates the sacrament. So they may not be priests at all.
I can see some people saying, who don't understand Catholic theology or sacramental theology, even the form, matter, and intention have to be present. They'll say, well, look, this is nitpicking, one word. They will forget that the whole issue in during the time of St. Athanasius, one iota, that expression came from the Arian heresy. One iota was the difference between Christ being man and not being man.
Well, also, you cannot go on the quantity of words. For example, you could make a statement, I do believe in God. And then you can make another statement adding one word, a three-letter word, I do not believe in God. I mean, it changes the whole thing. It's not a question of the size of the word or the quantity of words. It's a question of the meaning. For example, if we decided, because of our great love for the Blessed Virgin, Mother of God, and we love her dearly, and we believe that it is clearly the will of God that she is to be honored and to be loved, and she, without question, is the one spoken of as the one who would crush the head of Satan. But let us say, because of our devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary, we decided from now on, when we were to baptize, we would baptize a baby, we would say, I baptize thee in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Ghost and of the Blessed Virgin Mary. It's conceivable, depending upon the meaning intended by the addition of the words, the Blessed Virgin Mary, it's conceivable that that could be an invalid baptism.
You know, it's interesting, one of the most frequent canards which are thrown our way is that you know, John Paul II is doing everything he can, but all those bad bishops are opposing him every step of the way. Well, the fact of the matter is he personally appointed, I believe, over 50% of today's current bishops. But here's the question. If this priestly ordination is in fact doubtfully valid or invalid, what of all the bishops who were formerly priests, what of them? They were ordained doubtfully. What does this make of them now?
If the form is invalid, we are not declaring that it's invalid. We are saying that it introduces a change which raises a very serious question. If the change is a change in meaning, then it would invalidate. But obviously, if the form, objectively speaking, and God knows whether it is or is not per se invalid, if it is invalid, then they are not bishops. And the men that they have ordained are not priests, even if they ordained them in the old rite. And those priests now, for example, who are deputed by the local bishop at times to say the traditional Mass, if they were ordained in the new rite, and the new rite's invalid, obviously those are not Masses. The hosts they receive are not the body and blood of Christ.
You know, this brings back to mind a letter which one of the new priests wrote to us on a former program. I don't know when he was ordained, but he said, well, at least I am a priest in good standing. I think we could say then to him, you may not be a priest at all. But Mike...
And what he's in good standing with, too, is the church that has completely subverted the whole Catholic religion.
What this is such an enormous problem, it still seems understated. If it's conceivable then that of the few young priests that are left in this country, almost none of them, if any of them, are in fact priests.
It's at least doubtful. They are of doubtful validity, and in the practical order, when there is doubt concerning a sacrament, it's as good as nothing. You can't approach it if it's doubtful. So, yes, that's a very serious problem. In reality, either something is valid or it's invalid, as God sees it. But because we do not see the interior of things, so to speak, if something is doubtful, in the moral order, we cannot approach it.
You're watching What Catholics Believe. We talked about the doubtful validity of the new order of ordination. What are these new priests like? How do they think? What do they believe? How are they trained?
Well, they're trained, for the most part, according to the theology which reflects the new religion. And that theology is a certain relativism in morality, in doctrine, and of course they are trained not really to be priests at all, but apart from the question of validity or non-validity, they're trained to be presidents of the assembly. See, the whole idea of a priest is that he is a man taken from among men and deputed to deal with God, you see, and the things pertaining to God. He is not a president of the assembly. He is not the chairman of the board. He does not preside over meals. He is set apart. He continues the priesthood of Jesus Christ. He continues in an unbloody fashion the holy sacrifice of Calvary. And on the altar, at the moment of the consecration, at the double consecration, the reality of Calvary, those very sentiments which burned in the Sacred Heart of Jesus as he hung upon the cross, are made present upon the altar. And that is why the priesthood is so important. When you talk about these things and you try to put them into the context of the new church and the training of new priests, they're alien.
What Father said is, is true. Is I've talked to certain young men who wanted to go to the seminary and study, and you ask them, well, why do you want to be a priest? And they can't tell you really the answer. Well, they want to save souls. That's fine. But all of us became priests because we want to offer the holy sacrifice of the Mass, to call down God upon the altar, to change bread and wine into the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ. That is why we became priests. That is our main function. If we don't do anything else in the world, if we offer one Mass, all of our training, all of our discipline has been, in a sense, worth it, because we have done what we were ordained to do and trained to do. We have called down God upon you all. That is the one, as one power that the priest has to change bread and wine into the body and blood of Jesus Christ. The second power is the power to forgive sins. Not even the Blessed Virgin Mary or the saints or the angels in heaven, the angels in heaven cannot forgive another human being their sins. The priest is endowed with that power. That is a tremendous power given to men by God. That is why we became priests. Save souls, to offer sacrifice in the Mass, to forgive sins, minister the sacraments, and so forth and so on. This, in the new church today, is something radically different, which all the scandals and everything that you read in the newspapers today, I think reflect, as Father said, the theology and the training of the new church.
Now, speaking about these scandals, there have been an increasing, it's becoming increasingly visible in public how many priests and even bishops are caught in deviant behavior. And very often they'll say, well, gee, I'm sorry I did this, and they're moved to another parish, and we've got to forgive and forget and so forth, and it seems nothing is done. What's your feeling about these scandals, and what did the Church do in the past if, say, this kind of behavior occurred, or if, say, womanizing, on the other hand, occurred?
Well, first of all, I think the reason for the high rate of immorality among the clergy is because of what they are taught in the seminary. They are taught that nothing is absolute. There is no absolute norm of morality. They are not taught about the natural law, which makes something intrinsically evil if it's against nature. And so when they get certain feelings one way or the other, or whatever they should be, they indulge themselves in these things, and this is essentially what they're telling the people to do too. I mean, if they are dissolving marriages, you know, 50,000 a year, whatever it is, if they're saying to the people, just do what you feel like doing, they themselves do what they feel like doing. There is no idea of the imposition of the commandments of God, either on the people or on themselves. That is one reason. I think the other reason is that scandalously the authority, that is the bishops and ultimately John Paul II, do nothing about this scandalous behavior. I heard a story, and I have no reason to doubt it. It was told to me by parishioners in this diocese, where a young man, as an altar boy, had been molested by a priest, I'm sorry to say. And when he got into his 20s, he sued the diocese for this problem. And the response of the bishop was, well, many times it's the fault of the altar boys. I mean, as bad as the priest's sin was, the sin of the bishop in saying that is far worse. He is much worse than the individual sinning priest. The attitude of the Church before the Council was one of absolute horror in any kind of immorality of the clergy. Pius V, for example, punished in Rome, under his reign, sins against nature by burning at the stake. And Sixtus V, who came shortly after him, punished a cardinal who was guilty of immorality by chopping his head off. I mean, the Church, and if you read canon law and see the sanctions that go upon clergy who, in any way, whether it should be in the confessional with women or any kind of solicitation or any kind of misbehavior of that nature, canon law is very strict about punishing them. That's the real, I mean, it's scandalous that there is immorality, but what is even worse than that is the toleration, and you must even say the approval of the immorality by the high clergy.
I think, though, the high incidence of immorality in the new church is perfectly logical and consistent with its nature. Because you had first the corruption of the mind with the acceptance of widespread heresy, and then you have the corruption of morality, the corruption of the traditional teaching of the Church on what it is we must do to save our souls. And I think it is consistent. I think you have a corrupt body from a moral point of view because you have a corrupt body from a doctrinal point of view. It had not occurred to me before, but perhaps one of the reasons why as Father Sanborn alluded to it, perhaps one of the reasons why they have instituted this scandalous and despicable annulment policy may be to grant a kind of sanction to their own immoral behavior. Maybe they want to approve the loose living of the people as a kind of way to excuse their own immoralities and loose living.
There's an expression in Latin, corruptio optima est pessime. The corruption of the best becomes the worst. With the new hierarchy and the new clergy, because they have defected from the Catholic faith, they have turned towards something created by God. See, either all of us here, either we are in a state of sanctifying grace, or we are in the state of mortal sin. There is no middle ground. It's either or. Now, if a person defects from the faith, if God has endowed us, given us a special gift, and we have embraced the Catholic faith, and then by our own volition reject the faith, we have no alternative but to turn towards something created by God. And we become perverted. And I think in a general sense, all of the things that are happening, and you read them all of the time in the paper. I know in St. Paul, where I live, there are priests being sued because of unnatural vice. There's class action suits against 2 or 3 of them that are going on there for about 2 or 3 years now, have been settled out of court. That is a fact. And I think it is because they have lost the faith. They have turned towards something created by, as a creature of God. And it is a natural result or an effect of the loss of faith.
So St. Charles Borromeo, in speaking to his priests, pointed out to them something from the Old Testament, and that is the law perishes by a priest. And he said, if the people lose the faith, it's because the priests have lost the faith before them. And if the people lose their morality, it's because the clergy has lost its morality before them. And I think this is what has happened, that the reason why we see the complete breakdown of faith and morality, Catholic morality in the people, the way, for example, that the Catholic First Lady of Ohio could approve of all sorts of unnatural vice, is because there's something wrong in the clergy. That's the...
What you mentioned reminds me of an incident. I heard a Catholic layman for whom I have a great deal of respect and giving a little talk, and he made the remark that a priest who is not holy is a monster in the order of grace, and that is a striking remark.
St. Paul makes an allusion, a very explicit allusion in his epistle to the Romans about the causal relationship between a loss of belief, disbelief, and the grossest moral corruption. He says that God abandons certain souls. He abandons them to a reprobate sense. And as a result of this reprobate sense, they just sink into the most loathsome and despicable behavior. I think that is the reason why also we not only have, generally speaking, throughout the population, widespread unnatural vice and perversion, but we even now have a militant perversion, a militant spiritual poison and disease, where these people actually get out in public, in the streets, for example, of New York, and parade around the fact that they are deviants and perverts and living in opposition to the most fundamental laws of God and of nature itself. Mm-hmm. And I think it is ultimately traced back to this general revolt of the mind against the truth revealed by God and taught by the Church.
St. Paul's very clear that those who have left the natural use of the woman, and he says in one of his epistles of Romans that the fornicators, adulterers, and extortioners, so forth, will not enter the kingdom of heaven. They will not go to heaven.
In wrapping up, I'd like to ask a final question. It kind of relates to what Father said. If priests go bad, the people go bad. In the beginning of the 18th century, one 8% of the population of France were priests. That is, as if today we had 2.5 million priests in the United States. Actually, we only have 50,000. Today in France, 0.02% of the population is priest, and the number is diminishing very quickly. What does this statistic bode for us?
Actually, something very good, because the sooner that phony religion collapses, the better. I'd like to see 0.000% priests and, new priests, bogus priests, and see the true priests increase.
Okay. You've been watching What